Hi, Chuck Ashley, Quality Assurance Manager for Environmental and Drinking Water Labs for Baltimore City.
Oh, great. Welcome, Chuck. Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris from Metro Vancouver, Canada. I'm asset manager for the organization.
Good morning, Chris. Ryan.
Hey, everybody. Ryan Locicero. I'm business practice leader at Clean Water Services in Oregon.
Great. Welcome, Ryan. Mert.
Good morning, everyone. Mert Moftugil. I'm an engineer with the asset management branch of Portland Water Bureau.
Good morning, Mert. Pat.
Pat Boyle. I'm Pollution Control Program Administrator with Baltimore City Bureau of Water and Wastewater Facilities.
Welcome, Pat. And I see George. I don't know, George, your last name, but George, if you don't mind introducing.
Today I will be George Friedrich. I'm with Energy Management at Metro Vancouver.
Great. Welcome, George. And I see we had one more person join here. Inez?
Inez, yes.
Inez. Sorry, Inez.
DPW Bureau of Water, Wastewater.
Welcome, Inez. And Scott.
Yeah, Scott Haskins from Seattle. I'm supporting the project. Go ahead.
Great. Cello.
Yeah, and I'm Cello Vitasovich from California.
Excellent. Great. Well, I think I got everybody. My name is Dawn Uchiyama. I'm the Deputy Director at the Bureau of Environmental Services in Portland, Oregon. And we've got a great agenda planned today. We're going to hear from Leisa Thompson and what's happening in Minnesota regarding change management. And unless there are other further announcements or questions, I am going to turn it over to Leisa. Not seeing any hands. Not seeing any hands, but I do see that Makeda is able to join us, which is great.
All right, I'm going to try and see if I could share my screen.
And welcome, Makeda. We just did a round of introductions, and Lisa's going to start her presentation.
Great, thank you.
So Makeda's from DC Water.
All right, are you seeing a slide that has a glass with water in it?
Yes.
All right. So I'm Leisa Thompson, coming from Minnesota, virtually like all of you from your home states. I'm going to share a little bit of the change journey that environmental services has been on. Really quickly, we are a pretty large regional system. So we are formed through statute, but we're totally funded by user fees, essentially. And there's 110 communities that we provide the service to. So we have kind of a customer service focus as an organization. But, you know, we also have this role that we play within the Metropolitan Council, which is the regional planning agency. So we're just a part of that along with the transportation services, so bus transit and light rail, as well as community development and another smaller division that provides specialized transportation services. So we're part of the bigger system, but we have a very focused wastewater purpose that we're meeting. And we have a role in providing planning assistance for water quality or for drinking water supply. So basically, there was a drought several years back, and the region got a little worried that maybe the surface water systems were going to have difficulty meeting their needs. So that gives us kind of a broad perspective. And this slide was something we used back in about 2014, 2015, when we developed a strategic plan. And we were really embracing this idea of one water. That we know the problems we have arisen despite our best efforts, and we need to rethink how we go forward if we're going to tackle those problems. So a lot of change wrapped up in that. So in 2015, we decided that we needed to create and craft a vision, And when we went about it, we said we need to be a different kind of organization than a top-down. And so we went about it differently. We decided to have a lot more people involved and try and do it collaboratively. And so by the time we were done, this is a group of 40 that did some real intensive work together, and that came out very energized about our goals and where we wanted to go. And then we involved another 40 members of our 650 total organization in the process of refining those goals. So it really felt like we were on a good starting point for change and where we wanted to go, with a lot of buy-in. All the things that if you look at change management and what they tell you, if you want to change the status quo, there's certain things you have to do. And one of them is you have to have the energy of folks feeling like this, the way we are is not acceptable, or the way we're going to become if we don't do something different than what we currently are is going to be unacceptable. And we clearly had that. We had a lot of people feeling like we could be a better organization. And if we were that, we could be higher performing. And if we could partner and come at the water problems in the region more collaboratively, we could tackle those issues as well. So we had this vision of being that collaborative organization and making a difference. And we also talked about the steps we'd have to take to get there. So in theory, we should be well able and positioned to transform. What we have, and I'll give you a little foreshadowing, we have lived up to that to some degree, but we fall short in ways that we need to figure out how to move past. And so that's the focus of my message today, is where we're at, thinking about what's holding us back. So thinking, mental models, structure, and systems thinking are some themes you're going to hear throughout. And I'm going to start with posing a question for all of you to think about, because I don't have the answer to this, but it's been something that keeps popping into my mind. You know, change, the statistics on successful change hasn't moved despite lots of good management theory and performance individuals who have given us ways to go about it. And yet the best we see is 30%. And the same is true for engagement. That hasn't seemed to move either. And it's really interesting, I think, that they're both sitting at about the same percentage. And why are we stuck on both of those despite all the books and all the conversations and all the efforts that we have with trying to do better than that? So where we are at this point in our journey is trying to do that systems transfer of thinking. And one of the things that organizations in their traditional model have approached is this linear way of breaking it into pieces. So we're trying to think and get out of that box and think more simplistically about what are the fundamental functions of an organization. So you need a vision, and you need a mission, but then you need the capacity, the systems that will provide the capacity or readiness to execute on the mission. And then we need to have continuous improvement or learning based on feedback from the environment. And we're finding if we approach it from that point, then we don't come at it from whatever silo we're in. We're able to have a better wholeness in the conversation. So what that's led us to is spending more time starting out discussions in meetings or initiatives with reminding ourselves why we're doing something and what it is we're doing. And typically people are like, everybody knows that, and they jump right into the details. So for us, it's been extremely helpful in ways that we didn't envision, just to have that become more and more of a cadence, particularly as we look for the services we need from other parts of the council. So like an HR function, for example, oftentimes they want to jump in and tell us how to do something, and they don't have enough context and background to understand that's not a good idea. And then we get into the drama. So by always starting the meeting with that, we avoid some of that negative drama and reaction. So what's the fundamentals? This is traditional, silo-based. And from that, leaders are responsible, and we expect staff to be responsive. And that's the mindsets and the mental models that we've all grown up through school and most organizations today. And that comes from a place of thinking about organizations as being complicated. So if something's complicated, you think about, how am I going to do the best with this situation? And I'll plant that seed. We'll come back to that. We are embarking on the change that I mentioned in our strategic planning, but we're also now looking at servant leadership as the model that captures that, because our governor, who came in a few years ago, said, I want all of our governmental units to be approaching their work as servant leaders. And what that means is basically departing from traditional and taking this approach, which is the more collaborative partner. And what's key is you're setting it up so that the staff can be responsible and the managers need to be responsive to the staff. And that can happen very successfully once the organization is really clear on their vision and mission. So you're basically creating opportunities for leadership at all levels. So now we're talking about really embracing the fact that organizations are complex. And the next question for you to ponder is an organization more like a jet airplane or a bowl of spaghetti? We'll get to that answer soon. When we think about our work in the water industry, this is something we need to do to help our organizations perform well. But it's the same kind of thinking that we need to have when we try to work with other units of government on a one water journey. And so I think that this will serve us well, both within and external. And if we can do it well in our organization, then we'll be able to do it well with others. So I planted the seed. Are organizations complicated or complex? Is it more like a bowl of spaghetti or a jet airplane? Most people want to go to the jet airplane, and I think that's common because we're used to a lot of assets and pumps and parts and things that work. But the reality is we aren't like a jet airplane, because in a jet airplane, it's complicated. But if you took a part out and gave it to the right engineer, they'd be able to tell you, will this plane fly or not? And the reality is that we're not predictable within organizations. We're actually a complex adaptive system. And so like a bowl of spaghetti, there isn't even a supercomputer in the world that could predict how the spaghettis would respond if you pulled one spaghetti strand out. And organizations really have that kind of quality to them. Even though we think when we issue an order down the hierarchy, it doesn't really play out the way you would think it would if it was really built on a complicated system. And the other reality is, despite all this literature and advice and methodologies for change, there really isn't a step-by-step playbook, because as a bowl of spaghetti, we're all different. People are different, the organizations are at different places. So I think if we really come at our organizations embracing this idea, we need systems thinking, and we need to realize that as an adaptive organization, it's actually a strength. And if we work well with that, we don't need much for formal change management. So keep this in mind as you go forward. The real world works in systems. In fact, a lot of people say the wicked problems we have today have been created by not applying systems thinking to the work that we have to do. And so we need to better align how we think, which then drives what we do and how we do it with the real world systems. This is my favorite slide, greatest invention of all time. People working toward a common goal. There's nothing I derive more satisfaction and energy from than when I see a team of folks who are really clicking and getting great things done. You never underestimate the power of a small group of people to get great work done when they know and share the goal. So what does that all lead me to? We see behaviors out of individuals. So I'm talking leaders, staff, everybody in our organization. If we're adaptive and complex, we need to understand that below those behaviors, there's that person's emotions and thinking, and that's unique to everybody. So by applying systems thinking to that, we can understand better how to influence the organization as a whole. Here's the reality of, if you've heard of the Pareto principle, the 80-20, most of us think we know ourselves far better than we do. 20% of us know who we are and why and how to leverage that. 80% believe we do know who we are, but they've really only done about 20% of the work to truly know themselves. So if they're in a leadership position, they really don't know themselves, they can say, I really like where we're trying to go. But they don't see how they either help or hinder that. So that's on a personal level. And then you take that one step further. Now, what does it look like if you look at an organization? Well, within an organization, you also have observable behaviors, the events and the happenings that go on. And underneath that are patterns of behavior that are going on day to day. And people are adapting to those behaviors and responding to keeping themselves safe or ensuring their success. And then we've built a structure around that same dynamic. But underlying it all is the mental models that the leaders and the employees have taken on through time. So another way of looking at it, it starts with individuals and their internal mindsets and mental models. And that turns into observable behaviors. Now apply that to the organization. What is culture? It's the collective set of all those individual mindsets and mental models. And then we create our systems around those original mindsets and mental models of the leaders. So if we really want to have change in the organization and you want to apply the 80-20 principle, where would you focus your efforts? Where should leaders start? They need to understand and align their own mindsets and mental models in order to be the change with their thinking. Next, we all have to recognize that that's changing behaviors that have become habits. And habits are things that you do automatically without thinking. And then we need to go one step further, and we have to make sure that the systems and the organizations don't reinforce the old habits. Instead, we need them to reinforce the new ways of doing things. So I mentioned the word habit, and I think it's worth taking a minute to look at the neuroscience of habits and understand why it's so hard to change our behaviors even when we want to. So if you think back to that first slide and all those people were going, yay, and they were really energized and pumped up, and they really truly did want it. But when they went back to do their job, they fell back into the old groove and they weren't really living it. And part of that is the habits. So the brain, from a purely science perspective, uses 20% of the energy that we give our bodies every day, even though it's a small part of our body. 20% of that energy gets used for our cognitive thinking processes. 80% goes to the automatic habits that we do that get us through the day. It's important that we have that, but there are times when we need to be doing more thinking, and we're doing habits and unconscious. We're also disadvantaged in our thinking behaviors because our processing speed there is 40 bits per second. On that automatic unconscious response, it's 40 million bits per second. So that's why, when your life's in danger, you can react and prevent yourself from whatever that accident could be before you've even had a chance to cognitively think about it. And then here's another really serious one, why we don't want to create threat in our workplaces. If you feel a threat or stress, you're going to have less blood going to that part of your brain, and you're going to advantage your unthinking brain. And guess what? We use our fast brain more when we're tired, rushed, stressed, upset, hungry, our ego's being poked, or we're concerned about losing power. What does that all boil down to? 95% of our day goes through that unconscious brain function. And 5% is the slow brain. So what does that result in? Well, we want more slow brain because that's when we can be conscious about what it is our behavior is and how it connects up with the system. It's our opportunity to be deliberate. And it's also when we ask ourselves, what do I know about this? How would I want to respond to this situation? When we're in the fast brain, which we can slip into pretty easily, it's automatic, it's biased to confirm, and you think you already know what you need to know because it's working off of a set pattern or a way of reacting. So that's a challenge for us, even when we want to change. So a big piece of this, I think, is realizing how difficult it is for us to change our mental models and our behaviors, even when we want to. And a key piece of that, as this shows here, first, if you know yourself and the fact that you want to change, actually changing is a huge challenge. And I love the metaphor of the butterfly because the caterpillar, real happy, munching away on leaves. And, you know, that's the way managers are. They're in their groove. I've got, you know, this responsibility. They're basically having to agree to change into something else. And that can feel real uncomfortable. It isn't quite as bad as the caterpillar going through that middle phase to become a butterfly, but it's hard. And it's not going to be a quick transition. So I think that we all need to recognize that we need strong support systems to help each other as leaders when we fall off that track that we want to be on, so that we can helpfully get reminded that we've deviated or that we're off track or we've fallen back to the old way of doing things. So that's one area that we are focusing in on, is getting to know ourselves better as leaders and figuring out how we can make sure that we can give each other feedback when we need to be reminded that we're behaving in an old habit or an old way, and do it so the individual will receive it in a positive way, not feeling threatened or negative. And that also is a bit of a challenge for us to figure out. So obviously we're doing more team-based, more collaborative work, and there's the inner dynamics on this is helpful for us to think about, again, from a linear thinking of things like a complicated system. The stuff on the middle, we wouldn't really probably give a lot of thought to. But when we realize we have this complex adaptive, we go, wow, we're working with people and we're not all thinking the same way and we have different mindsets. We have to give our time and ourselves time and permission to go through those inner process dynamics in order to get to the sustained long-term change. So I will stop at that point. I hope I didn't overdo the time here. And I'm willing to take any questions. I know I went through it really quickly, but you know, we're on a journey, and we know that we've got more work to do to figure it out, but we do still have people that have the discontent with the old way and the vision of how it could be, but we're still working through that A part, the actions to get there. So I'll close it out there.
This is great, Lisa. Can you come and talk to my leadership team like tomorrow morning? Can I have you, can I invite you to my leadership team tomorrow morning? This really, really wonderful presentation and overview. And I love that you're tapping into the complex adaptive systems and personal behavior and really looking at individuals' contributions. And oh my gosh, we could talk for days about this, but I do want to open it up for questions, and I will make sure that we have enough time to use your time wisely while you're here. But that was really wonderful. And I guess I'll just kick it off with the question and ask, where do you find your inspiration for this? I saw that you have, some slides from consultants and some literature. Would you describe yourself as a leader, as someone who has done self-learning and have done your readings and gone to workshops and those kinds of things? But the kind of information that you presented today is not typical subject matter or topics within wastewater and water utilities, except for a few enlightened ones. And so I'm just really curious where your inspiration comes from. If you've worked with good consultants, or you're doing your own reading, or you have a network of people in your state and in your organization. Can you just say a little bit about where it comes from?
Well, definitely I'm doing a lot of reading and learning that way.
Mm-hmm.
But coming from a place of questions, like, okay, I have this question about why that is, and then I look for possible places that I might find some perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned some time ago that there isn't one playbook out there that's going to answer that question and have all the other stuff right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if anything, my library is probably too big for most people's appetite, but I don't always read the entire book. I search for the part that's needed.
Yeah.
I have been on the quest of having an empowered, that's probably a fairly old term, empowered staff. And that's just been my passion.
Mm-hmm.
So all along the journey as a manager, I've always focused on helping uplift the staff to be able to feel empowered, basically, that they've got the training and the skills and the understanding in order to step in and just, charge in and do that. So I truly mean it when I say, I think the best invention of all time is our human nature to get together and work and accomplish great things.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I totally agree. And there's lots of questions here, so I have to be quiet now and take the questions. I'm not sure the order, but according to the list here in Teams, Alice, you're first.
Hi, yeah, great, thank you. And I'm going to reveal my sort of bias and interests also in this question. But so I'm really interested in what you were talking about with the change in mental models. But I've found that, when people start from a specific mental model, when they try to look for information, they go down a particular path, one that is more consistent with their own mental models. And so I didn't hear, what I've been interested in for a few years now is how interdisciplinarity can bring in new mental models to an organization and help people think of things differently. And I didn't hear you mention that at all. I know you talked about collaboration, but there's knowing yourself, but there's also knowing that there are other ways of thinking about the world out there that are equally valid and trying to somehow bring them together that I didn't quite get in what you were saying. I just wonder if you have any comments on that. Actually,
I'll show you another slide that I happen to have at hand. So now we're talking about trying to reshape people's mental model. Can you now see?
Yes.
The slide? All right, good. These are some things that we are embracing and ensuring that not only our leaders, but in a lot of cases, our employees know and understand these. So probably one of the key mental models would be the SCARF, create wholeness by participant engagement safety. So there's a comment I like to say that you never know what you didn't get because someone was silent, the voices you don't hear. And this idea of the 5 things that are listed in the first category, that's what SCARF stands for: status, certainty, autonomy, related, and fairness. And we have helped our managers really truly understand from a neuroscience basis what those are and how they make a difference in whether those participants in whoever they're engaging with, if they're really engaging. Because if they're not, it's most likely they don't feel safe. And sometimes it's our structure that makes that happen, because if they're feeling like it's really a top down and I need to do what I'm told and I'm not expected to think and all those kinds of things, then the manager has to be very clear that, no, we want your full participation. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
But I guess part of my question is that it's one thing to make sure everybody who's present is speaking up. But if you have only engineers present, then you're still not going to get as wide a differences of opinion as if you had a very different backgrounds, people with very different, so a more diverse team. So, one part of it is making sure everybody's heard and feels comfortable to speak out. Another one is making sure you don't have all the same people in the room.
Absolutely. So then you go to the middle column, which is the RN, and that's actually where we're right now trying to embrace this idea of, so we've got an executive team, and they don't span enough of the variety of input that we need often for the kinds of decisions or work that it's coming before them. Mm-hmm. So we are expanding that group to include a lot of other people. And there is a book I'll actually make as a recommendation.
Please.
I think it's called Cracking Complexity. Mm-hmm. And there they talk about having the requisite variety in the conversation or the work in order to get that whole systems view into the picture. And so it goes even beyond the RN. So that's kind of, we're at that, least we have to have the RN, but we are going to be launching an effort now that we're going to go into that requisite variety. And I think that's going to be a real fun experience to do.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm going to keep chipping away at these questions here. Kesera, did I pronounce your name right?
Yep, no, that's fine. Kesra,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That was a really cool presentation. I've seen a lot of change management kind of presentations here and there, but this one has really inspired me.
Thank you.
The reason being that it really connects the brain to the change, to human nature, because we say change is difficult, change is hard, it's hard to accept, for whatever reason, whether it's you don't feel safe or you don't really care, or whatever the reasons are, there is that correlation. So this is really exciting to see. My question to you is that traditionally, whenever I've been in any change management discussion of any kind, we always start with how do we bring people together to collaborate, right? So it's all about the business, it's all about the work. And so that we get people to change, which is great, and we have made some strides because of that. However, I feel like after seeing your presentation today is, how would you feel about us changing that from saying, how do we bring together to collaborate and hear voices, as opposed to how do we get people to understand how our brains work towards change? So instead of starting from collaboration, start from, hey guys, if I went into a meeting and said, hey, 30 minutes, we're just going to talk about our brain and how it functions, and then, how our behaviors towards change, then that's more of a self-reflection, so that when I'm in the next week's 30-minute meeting, now I'm more in tune with how do I get my brain. So really start from that mental thing to what we need in our businesses, as opposed to what do we need in our business, and try and attack. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but I just wondered what your thoughts would be on that.
Well, I think I do. So oftentimes what I observe is that we'll have a manager who is a good cheerleader for this change, but they have some mental beliefs that they haven't quite realized clash with that. And so there's these situations where staff are like, well, which is it? And the manager themselves don't even realize that they just stepped out of that and stepped into their thinking about authority, let's say, or I need to control this because if it doesn't go well, it's me on the line, so that gets to that systems piece. We have to make sure that we're setting the stage so that person doesn't have to keep hanging on to that mental model, that if this group, if we have some basic rules about how we want to approach that, if all that's right, you're not going to be called on the carpet because we did it the way we want to do it. And actually people worry more about the outcomes than I think they should, because I've always seen a team accomplish great things, even if their strategy wasn't the perfect one. They're so passionate about achieving it that they do anyway. It's like,
That's great. That's great. Okay, thank you for that question, Makeda.
Oh, I'm on mute. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I really liked, again, the focus on how do we shift a mental model. And I was wondering if you had any advice or thoughts on how this is played out in your environment. I find that a lot of times there's a really strong emotional attachment to those mental models and the sort of maybe ways of doing work. So how do you address that emotional piece without necessarily triggering people to become more defensive or turning into a therapy session with folks who may not be as receptive to that emotional side of things and those sorts of conversations?
so if I'm tracking with your question, hopefully this answers that. Early on, I had the arrow and why are we doing something? What is it we're trying to do? And then you get into the detail. A lot of resistance comes from, I don't want to disturb the status quo. Don't bother me with your initiative or what you're trying to do. Or, oh my God, that's a bunch of work. Or how are we ever going to figure this out? And so you get into this roadblock because the others don't see the need for it. But if you start with that why and what, it becomes much harder for them to ignore it or to work at cross purposes to it. Because those seem to be the two things that when we want change and we need others to be part of that change and we feel like they're ignoring it or they're at cross purposes to it, the best way for us to get through that is to go back to our bigger vision and mission and talk about why we need to do this and why it's important. All of a sudden, their resistance about not wanting to be bothered by the change, that what it's going to mean for their work, starts to look a little too insignificant for them to continue to resist.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both. Great question, great answer. Mert and then George.
Oh, thank you, and thanks, Don. Thank you, Lisa. This was quite something. So I guess like most of us, I'm biased to find meaning in complexity. So I was thinking in the background, like sort of like these common traits of organizations that may use more of the slow brain, as you so nicely described in that slide. So I came up with a few things, and I guess we covered it a little bit, but I was wondering what you think about them. So I'm thinking it's like things like inclusion, so that there are more voices around the table, like Alice was saying. I guess better communication, connectivity, like a lateral organization versus more vertical organization. I think that's a good one. No fear environment. I don't know how else more eloquently put it. So that seems like a good one. The last two that I could think of are a little weird, like adaptability of individual staff, and sort of goes with that, but sort of a comfort in operating in ambiguity, kind of like that mental strength to operate in ambiguity a little bit. I don't know, like do these make sense? Is there other more important traits that could lead an organization to use more of its slow brain?
I think that's really good. I think that to help us and to make it simple enough, because there's a lot of complexity to all of this, is if we can identify the few, I'll call them simple rules that we all want to try and focus in on and abide by, that will help us, I think, start to march together in this change that we're trying to do. So we are actually looking at those aspects of things with how we're going to move forward. For example, we are going to put some rules in for asking for feedback. So if we're going to learn how well things are going, we need to be giving feedback. And the other neuroscience, that whole threat basis, if you ask for feedback, you will receive it less defensively and with less threat, and the person will be able to do it with less threat, and so you benefit from more of that. So we're trying to create this rule about, hey, every meeting that you conduct, you need to close it out asking for some kind of feedback. And start to develop a habit of asking for feedback. So that's, one way of getting more of a wholesale change for behaviors.
And modeling good behavior. Yeah, that's great. Mark, can I just ask, what was your third? You said environment. I missed what you said before that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying, sorry, my pronunciation, maybe no fear environments.
Oh, no fear. Yep.
I'll put it just very simply.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, but
so one thing you might want to think about in the context of that, because I think you've got a lot of good thoughts going there, is developing the resources and the capability from within your organization to be a team leader or to facilitate a meeting or an initiative, and to develop staff that are engineers and have other roles in the organization to be able to do that, and then tap them to because now they see another aspect of their work and they understand how we want to do things, so they can also help us stay on track. And, the old model was, we got to bring in a consultant or a facilitator, to come and do this for us. And now we're tapping staff from within. And what they're bringing is not only that skill, but their passion for the subject. It's like, oh, yes, this will be great if we can get us all on the same page and we can get someplace and get something accomplished we wouldn't do otherwise.
Yep, that's great. Okay, George.
You're on mute, George.
Here I am. My aim is off on my buttons here. Thanks, Lisa. That was very interesting. I'm going to back up, I think, from maybe some of the other questions that have been asked and ask you if you can kind of give us an overview of how. So you're a subject matter expert in this process, and I find it super interesting. But one of the challenges that we have in our organization is that I think we undertake a lot of initiatives because the industry is doing it, or it makes sense, or there's some kind of external pressure or expectation. So we undertake these initiatives, we put people in charge of in quote unquote in charge of them, who really, I'm one of them, who have no authority really to do anything other than try and affect change. So I am very interested in how you, as a subject matter expert, can use this in your organization. Like, in your organization, is there an official change management process, or is there an official, are you the subject matter expert to be able to kind of guide people along the pathway, recognizing that the people who are in charge may or may not be interested in the neuroscience or the behavioral, all of the theory. I personally am very interested because, it's what's going to make things work. But recognizing that we have to, I guess the way you put it was, we have to start with the dissatisfaction of the current state. That in itself is a real potential roadblock when there's potentially an aversion to change in general. So how do you, or how would you suggest that an organization approach the subject of, do we have a change management process? Do we need a change management process? And what does that process entail? And how do we ensure that when a new initiative comes along, we ask the question, does this initiative fit into our change management, whatever, protocol or whatever? We treat sewage, we treat drinking water, and we collect garbage. And to get everybody to the point where they understand this process, for all the very well-intended changes we try to undertake, how do you take this and put it into a structure? Sorry, that's a really long question. Hopefully you kind of.
Yes, I think I can react. I don't know if I'll be able to cover the full gamut very well, but it's hard to start with the org structure because everybody's used to the parts and the pieces for, so long. So I think you have to start by successes that get people seeing a better way or a different way of going about things. In my situation, I've been with the organization since the mid-'80s, and I've held different positions. Right now, I'm the general manager. So through that entire time, I've been encouraging leaders and hiring leaders that had more of a connection or ability to connect with this kind of thinking. So I have that finally, but I tell you, in my early years, I created a huge mind map of all the inertia. I sat down with the then general manager and he admired it. He really did. He goes, wow, yeah, no, yeah. We couldn't even begin to talk about how to break through the inertia. So that's been on my radar for a while. I really think you start with what's your optimal place to start where that inertia is present, because you don't have the whole system in the room for the discussion. You don't have enough variety of perspectives to approach it from a different place other than the boxes that people are already seeing themselves in. I don't know if this is a good illustration or not, but we're about to embark on something that actually is a little bit putting me out of my comfort zone. So we're part of the Met Council. And in the hierarchy, we look like we report up to the HR and the IT and all those folks. And we used to have, ES was its own organization, and this was during my time. So we had like a 5-person communications section, all these different, they're gone. So now we have one person that helps us get a newsletter out and things like that. And it's like, we're way under communicating, but it's really not communication, it's information needs that we have. And so we're in this dilemma of the person just left. And because they have communication in their title and we have a new communications director at the upper level, they're like, wait, that person's doing communications work. They need to be in our silo. And we're like, it just isn't going to work that way because of the nature of the work. But that's the part and box, breaking things into pieces. So we're going to do a systems effort where we try to get enough variety in the room to talk about and distinguish what is the needs within ES as a system, which probably isn't going to be a communication system. It's probably going to be an information system, because it's really trying to get information to employees. So back to the 4 functions of an organization, do they have the capacity and the learning to keep improving and delivering on the mission? So I think if we come at it from a different direction, make sure we get all the people of the system in the room, then that old inertia of, I'm not interested, don't disturb my box. But we will have not done anything like that before. And because we're messing around with the uppers and more of the political assigned people, we have to be careful.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Really good. Cello?
Yeah, really a great presentation. I would just like to offer a couple of things. The idea of the concept of fast brain and slow brain was discovered by a team of researchers from Israel, Daniel Kahneman and Tversky. And they won a Nobel Prize in economics. That was the first time that a Nobel Prize for economics went to somebody who's not an economist. Later, it happened with Richard Thaler as well. And they discovered that economics was not about money, that it was about people. Their models before were based on a rational model, which is what Leisa, which is in terms of physiology, it's the frontal cortex, which is the slow part, and assumed that people are rational, which goes back to the Enlightenment and those ideas. and they were notoriously inaccurate. And the Kahneman and Tversky showed that people make decisions exclusively based on their emotional and subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea about mental models, if you like to, I'm sure Leisa has also looked into that, was a team from MIT, especially Chris Argyris, from MIT with his ladder of inference. And they sort of applied that to more organizational settings. If there's more interest in these things, we can expand on them in future meetings as well. The interesting thing is that if we look at, okay, these emotions, what they govern how we behave, and we have to, be a more rational. And when they did research on what's underneath, what drives our emotions, Jonathan Haidt from Cornell discovered that it is a moral matrix that has 6 components. So, and these different components determined how somebody's going to behave in different situations. All of these things are fascinating. And I think Leisa did a marvelous job to, package it up, condense a lot of reading into a short period of time.
Yeah.
Before we go, because we have just a few more minutes, I just wanted to say we will need to come up with a sort of a deliverable on the project, and what will be very helpful if anybody who's interested in sort of joining what we would call a core team, to look at some of these things, if they can just send either Scott or me an email, we'd like to get a smaller group of folks to try to look at the available methods for change management and so forth. And we realize that everybody is really busy. It's a crazy situation, so we always feel bad asking for people to kind of engage. But if you can send us an email, we've done the same on the workforce and the organizational culture side of things. So that's what I wanted to say. It's a fascinating conversation, but also on the more tangible things, please let us know, whoever's interested in engaging on the change management things, so that we can prepare some things for the future meetings.
Yep, that's great, Cello. Thank you. Mert and George, you still have your hands raised. I presume that was from last time. We've got less than 5 minutes. I want to really thank Leisa for her time this morning. I have a feeling I'll be in touch with you about some things that we can talk about. And I also want to acknowledge, I'm not sure that everyone knows this, but Leisa is the lead on the culture team.
Workforce.
Oh, sorry, workforce. I'm sorry, I mixed that up. On the workforce team. So Leisa is leading her own, facilitating her own team, and I think we've touched base a little bit. I think our last meeting we looked at what workforce and what culture, what both of those teams are doing in terms of deliverables. So I propose that the next meeting we dive into this a little bit more. I really encourage you to consider Cello's request about availability over the next 3 or 4 months to help develop a product that this larger team can review, and also I think probably consider contributing or participating in a workshop. I think that there's a workshop in our future to bring this information together in a way that will be useful for the project. So any feedback or closing comments before we let folks go on to their Wednesday?
Yeah, so Mert, you have your hand up.
Yeah, is it okay to, I can also contribute to George's question if it's okay, if we are wrapping up, that's fine.
Sure, we have a minute if you want to go, unless I don't see anyone else's hands raised. So
okay, I wanted to tell George, I've sort of worked in an environment for like over a decade where I didn't have any authority over people, even though I had to sort of, use their time for objectives. So what has worked for me are, sort of starting with always like the end in mind, as the start in terms of like what is that change we want to get to. And from there, really, it comes down to two things. One of them is once you identify the people to work with, trying to play to the strengths of individual team members so that they will like to work on things, because this is oftentimes above and beyond. Another thing is, especially if you're asking them to work on things that are not in their strength pool as much, then I try to highlight the nobler aspects of the benefits of achieving change and helping you and helping others often. So those are some of the messages that has worked for me in the past. Anyway, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Mert. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, any closing comments? Well, thank you so much, Leisa. I really enjoyed this morning. Very inspirational. I'm going to let that sink in for a little while, and I'm sure that we'll be in touch again. Scott, Cello, any
No, I'd
closing
say
remarks?
that also making Lisa's presentation available to others is something that we can do too.
Excellent.
Yes. Yep. That would be great. I enjoyed the conversation and good questions from everybody. Some of them have gotten me thinking about some things I hadn't thought about.
Great.
Lisa, is it okay if we use these presentations in our organization?
Sure. Yep. Any opportunity to drive change, if it helps you, that would be great. And feel free to reach out too if you've got a question or want a little bit more background on anything.
I would love to invite you to one of our meetings where we have our executive leadership team in there too.
We're going to have to get a line formed here.
Yeah,
All right. Well, thank you for your generosity, Leisa.
You're
really
welcome.
Appreciate it. All right. Everyone have a good day.
Bye now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.